2, 3. Mine.
Hello.
You want mine?
Testing, one, yep, mine's good.
Oh, this one's working now, ma'am. Yeah.
Hello.
Is it working? There we go. Thank you for your patience. The subcommittee will now come to order. Welcome everyone to this open hearing of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Emerging Threats and Capabilities. Today we will examine the DoD's efforts to transform the delivery of artificial intelligence-enabled capabilities to the warfighter. AI and machine learning are topics of priority and deep interest among the members of this subcommittee as we build a blueprint for the battlefield of the future. Over the last year, we have explored these technology issues closely and heard from numerous outside subject matter experts on the emerging opportunities, challenges, and implications of adopting commercial artificial intelligence solutions into the defense enterprise. We have also closely examined our adversaries' investments in AI and related technologies, including China's whole-of-society approach, which threatens our competitive advantage. In response, this committee has taken deliberate bipartisan actions to better organize the Department of Defense to oversee, accelerate, and integrate artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies. The John S. McCain National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2019 directed the Secretary of Defense to conduct a comprehensive national review of advances in AI relevant to the needs of the military services. Section 238 further directed the Secretary to craft a strategic plan to develop, mature, adopt, and transition artificial intelligence technologies into operational use. Additionally, Section 1051 established the National Security Commission on AI, an independent entity inside the executive branch to take a holistic view of the competitiveness of U.S. efforts and elevate the national conversation surrounding the national security implications of AI. Today, we will continue this conversation and hear about the DoD's efforts to reorganize and more effectively oversee the execution of AI programs across the military services. We will also examine the department's investments in basic research to generate groundbreaking AI capabilities for future conflict. The transformation and prioritization of AI inside the department today will shape the efficiency of DoD's business functions and, most importantly, the effectiveness of our forces in future battle. Let me welcome our witnesses here today. Dr. Lisa Porter, Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering at the DoD, and Mr. Dana Deasy, Chief Information Officer at the DoD. We look forward to your testimony. And finally, I want to take this time to recognize and express this subcommittee's gratitude to two staff members who will be departing the committee this month, Nevi Shadler and Mark Peppel. Thank you so much for all of your work this past year and years prior. Your contributions to this committee are appreciated from both sides of the aisle, and we wish you best of luck in your next endeavors. Let me now turn to Ranking Member Jim Langevin for his opening comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank and welcome our witnesses here today. And this year, the Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee has placed a significant emphasis on how artificial intelligence, machine learning, and associated technologies can be used to advance U.S. warfighting and deterrence capabilities and bring efficiencies to business processes and systems in the Department. In June, the subcommittee held an industry roundtable where we focused largely on the implementation of AI in the Defense Innovation System and how the Department of Defense can best leverage in-house and commercial capabilities to support military functions. During the roundtable discussion, I expressed serious concerns about what I perceived as a disjointed, ad hoc approach by DoD in developing department-wide AI policies, strategies, and programs. Since then, I'm pleased to see that the Department has made some strides toward refining and refocusing its AI programs and initiatives. Most notably, the Department launched the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. I look forward to better understanding how this center, located under the Chief Information Officer, will bring synergy to department-wide efforts. More specifically, I hope to hear today about the center's structure, mission, roles, and responsibilities, coordination with the military services, and plans for delivering and scaling critical AI capabilities. Finally, I'd like to better understand how the center fits into the Department's cloud initiative. Now, many claim that data is the new oil. Access to data, data integrity, and data labeling are key issues facing the Department. In addition to hearing about the Joint AI Center, I look forward to hearing from Mr. Deasy about how he is setting standards and issuing other guidance to the services, agencies, and other entities pertaining to these issues. In August, through Chairwoman Stefanik's leadership, we successfully authorized the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. I commend the Chair for her work. I was proud to join her in that effort. The Commission has been tasked with comprehensively examining U.S. advances in AI with regard to investments in basic and advanced research, efforts to recruit top-notch talent, ethical and safety considerations for military applications, and strengthening our global competitive advantage in the field. I appreciate the DoD's partnership in standing up the Commission and look forward to hearing more about its plans to prioritize funding and resources for the Commission during today's hearing. I also look forward to hearing more about the division of roles and responsibilities for the AI portfolio between the Department's Undersecretary of Defense, Research and Engineering and the Chief Information Officer, as well as efforts to synthesize AI strategies and plans with the services. There's enormous momentum around AI, and it's exciting. And it's critical that the U.S. capitalize on this momentum in order to maintain its technological edge. As a matter of national security, I strongly encourage the Department to continue to strengthen its partnerships with academia and the private sector, better leverage federal labs, invest in cutting-edge research, and continue to explore applications of AI with the interagency to ensure that we remain at the forefront of AI innovation. Before I yield back, I too want to join Chairwoman Stefanik in recognizing Dr. Mark Pebble, Chase, and Nev Chandler, clerk for the services, their service to the committee, as well as they depart at the end of the year. I want to thank them for their work. They make great contributions to our work here in the committee, and we're grateful for their service. So thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Langevin. I also want to welcome the Chairman of the full committee, Chairman Thornberry, who is here with us today, and this issue is of deep interest to him, as reflective of the interest of committee members beyond this subcommittee. Without objection, the witnesses' prepared statements will be made part of the record. I ask that you please keep your opening remarks to no more than 5 minutes, and Dr. Porter will begin with you.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yes. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Stefanik, Ranking Member Langevin, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to appear before you today to discuss artificial intelligence, particularly as it relates to national security applications. As this subcommittee knows, artificial intelligence, or AI, is not a new thing. As long as there have been computers, there have been engineers who have dreamed of enabling machines to think the way humans do. In fact, DARPA funded much of the early work in AI decades ago. Today, we are experiencing an explosion of interest in a subfield of AI called machine learning, where algorithms have become remarkably good at classification and prediction tasks when they can be trained on very large amounts of data. There are numerous examples of successful applications of machine learning techniques. Some of the obvious ones include facial recognition in photographs and voice recognition on smartphones. However, there has also been a significant amount of hype and confusion regarding the current state of the art. It is the USD-R&E position that we must not abandon the tenets of scientific rigor and discipline as we pursue the opportunities that AI presents. Today's AI capabilities offer potential solutions to many defense-specific problems. Examples include object identification in drone video or satellite imagery and detection of cyber threats on networks. However, there are several issues that must be addressed in order to effectively apply AI to national security mission problems. First, objective evaluation of performance requires the use of quantitative metrics that are relevant to the specific use case. In other words, AI systems that have been optimized for commercial applications may not yield effective outcomes in military applications. Second, current AI systems require enormous amounts of training data, and the preparation of that data in a format that the algorithms can use, in turn, requires an enormous amount of human labor. Furthermore, AI systems that have been trained on one type of data typically do not perform well on data that are different from the training data. For example, algorithms that are trained on internet images will generally underperform when used on drone or satellite imagery. Another well-known limitation of current systems is that they cannot explain what they do, making them hard to trust. Furthermore, current systems require robust processing power. And finally, current systems are susceptible to various forms of spoofing, known as adversarial AI. We are working to address these challenges and vulnerabilities through multiple efforts, most of which will lever the complementary roles of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, the JAIC, and the USD-R&E enterprise. The JAIC will offer a means to rapidly determine the appropriate metrics for operational impact for a variety of applications, as well as the operational performance limitations of current tools. And these insights will help inform algorithm and system development across multiple USD-R&E efforts. Furthermore, the JAIC's focus on scaling and integration will drive innovation in data curation techniques, while DARPA will pursue algorithms that can be robustly trained with much less data. In order to address AI's trust issue, DARPA's Explainable AI program aims to create machine learning techniques that produce more explainable models while maintaining a high level of performance. The High Performance Computing Modernization Program is designing new systems that will provide ample processing power for AI applications on the battlefield. Finally, countering adversarial AI is one of the key focus areas of DARPA's AI Next campaign. Ultimately, as we look to the future, we anticipate a focus on developing AI systems that have the ability to reason as humans do, at least to some extent. Such a capability would greatly amplify the utility of AI, enabling AI systems to become true partners with their human counterparts in problem solving. It is important that we continue to pursue cutting-edge research in AI, especially given the significant investments our adversaries are making. We are therefore grateful for the leadership and support that the members of the subcommittee have shown regarding AI. We also appreciate the establishment of the National Security Commission on AI, whose charter is appropriately focused on key areas that must be assessed objectively to ensure that the U.S. maintains a leadership position in AI-enabled technologies and systems. Thank you for your interest in this important topic, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Deasy.
Good afternoon, Ms. Chairwoman, ranking members, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I thank you for this opportunity to testify on the Department's progress in AI adoption and the establishment of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. I am Dana Deasy, the Department of Defense Chief Information Officer. I am the Principal Advisor to the Secretary of Defense for a set of responsibilities that integrate together to ensure that DoD has the information and communications technology capabilities needed to enable the broad set of missions we perform as a joint force. The application of AI is rapidly changing a wide range of business and industries. The 2018 National Defense Strategy foresees that ongoing advances in AI will change society and ultimately the character of war. In June, Deputy Secretary Shanahan directed my office to establish the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center as a focal point for that endeavor. In parallel, DoD submitted its first AI strategy to Congress and annexed to the NDS. JAIC's formation also dovetailed Section 238 of the latest NDAA. Going forward, JAIC will benefit from and help bring into reality recommendations of the National Security Commission on AI. In talking about the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, I'd like to highlight three themes today. The first is delivering AI-enabled capabilities at speed. JAIC is collaborating now with teams across DoD to systematically identify, prioritize, and select mission needs, and then rapidly execute a sequence of cross-functional use cases that demonstrate value and spur momentum. Projects fall into two main categories: national mission initiatives and component mission initiatives. NMIs are driven and executed by JAIC, whereas CMIs are component-led but are able to make use of JAIC's common tools, libraries, best practices, and more. I'll note that our new emphasis on rapid, iterative delivery of AI complements the Department's ongoing work at the other end of the AI spectrum and fundamental research, as Dr. Porter shared with you today. Two examples of early projects. First, predictive maintenance. The NMI helps address Secretary Mattis's direction to the services to improve their maintenance readiness rates and offers well-defined return on investment criteria. A second example, humanitarian assistance, and disaster relief. This NMI is an open mission to apply AI to saving lives and livelihood. We are applying lessons learned and reusable tools from the DoD's AI Pathfinder, Project Maven, to field AI capabilities in support of such events as hurricanes and wildfires. The second theme is all about scale. Jake's early projects serve a dual purpose: to deliver new capabilities to end users, as well as to incrementally develop the common foundation that is essential for scaling AI's impact across the DoD. This means shared data, reusable tools, libraries, standards, and AI cloud and edge services that help jumpstart new projects. We will put this in place, this foundation, in a manner that aligns with the DoD enterprise cloud adoption. Let me underscore that point. Our enterprise approach for AI and enterprise cloud adoption via the DoD-wide cloud strategy are mutually reinforcing, mutually dependent undertakings. The third theme is we build the initial Jake team. It's all about talent. And this will be represented across all the services and all components. Today, we have assembled a force of nearly 30 individuals. Going forward, it is essential that Jake attract and cultivate a select group of mission-driven, world-class AI talent, including pulling these experts into service from industry. In closing, 2 weeks ago, in front of 380 companies and academic institutions at DoD's AI Industry Day, I announced we had achieved a significant milestone. Jake is now up and running and open for business. I look forward to continuing to work with Congress in this critical area in an ongoing dialogue on our progress in AI adoption and the ways in which Jake is being used to accelerate that progress. Thank you for this opportunity to testify this afternoon, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for those opening statements. I want to ask a broad question to begin. I am deeply concerned as I read headline after headline announcing the U.S.'s looming defeat when it comes to the global race for AI dominance. It seems like every week there is a new headline. I want to quote a recent article, the fall of this year, in Foreign Policy. There will not be one exclusively military AI arms race. There will instead be many AI arms races as countries and sometimes violent non-state actors develop new algorithms or apply private sector algorithms to help them accomplish particular tasks. In North America, the private sector invested some $15 billion to $23 billion in AI in 2016. That's more than 10 times what the U.S. government spent on unclassified AI programs that same year. China says it already holds more than 20% of patents in the field and plans to build its AI sector to be worth $150 billion by 2030. My broad question is, are we falling behind already? If so, how far behind, and how do we jumpstart it to make sure that we do not lose our technological edge when it comes to AI? Dr. Porter, I'll start with you.
So I would say we are not behind. Right now, we are actually ahead. However, we are in danger of losing that leadership position. So your concern is certainly valid.
And I'm going to jump in there. How are we ahead? How do we measure that?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of ways to assess that. But if you look at terms of our talent, particularly in our academic base, the United States, along with our partners in the UK and Canada in particular, are seen, even by the Chinese, as having quite a lead. And I'll tell you the reason for that, and this is an important point to make, and I alluded to it in my opening. DARPA in particular, and also the NSF, has been funding this field for decades. So we have built an extremely robust and deep bench in the disciplines that are required to advance this field. Even when you hear about AI winters in the past and so forth, the United States continued to invest robustly in this domain for decades. And then we have this vibrant private sector that is able to turn around and take that research and rapidly convert it to commercial products and create new markets. So we have a lot going for us, and I believe China has, unfortunately, or fortunately, if you're from China, I guess, they have figured out that that's one of the key ingredients to our success, that we have a multi-tiered approach in this country to ensuring that we continue to stay on the cutting edge. We invest heavily in academia, we invest heavily in our labs, and then we figure out how to convert those investments quickly and rapidly into products and creating new markets. They recognize that, and that's why you are seeing a tremendous increase in their investments, particularly in academic as well as startup community, which I think you were alluding to.
What about the race for data? You talked about some of the challenges that we face. Obviously, data is the fuel for AI. So when we talk about an AI arms race, part of that is a race for data and being able to analyze data in a comprehensive way. Can you comment on that, Dr. Porter? Beyond the challenges, what are our solutions to ensure that we have the fuel to help propel our AI research?
Yeah, so data is a very key element. I've commented on this, and so has the New York Times. Probably you saw the article a couple weeks ago highlighting how China has created these places where people are sitting there and essentially labeling data, right, for their needs. So one of the things we have to do is we have to be smarter about how we understand how these algorithms are working, and that's why DARPA always looks at a problem and says, okay, how do we do this better? Our industrial sector also recognizes these challenges, so they're going to look at how do we do this better. So it's not going to be just about how do we get a lot of data. It's going to be about how do we develop algorithms that don't need as much data. How do we develop algorithms that we trust as they're using the data and they're evolving the data. And this is where the JAIC comes in. I think this is why the powerful connection between R&E and JAIC is so important, because we have an opportunity now as we want to test out new ideas. We get to a point where we use something like DIU that says, hey, what's going on in the private sector? How are they trying out new things? Let's try to prototype and then get them out into the operational place more quickly and say, how is that actually working? So this can be a very powerful way for us to accelerate the experimentation that's going to be continual to stay ahead of the game. Because it can't just be about labeling data. It's got to be about being smarter using the data that you've got.
Thank you. Dr. Langevin?
Dr. Langevin, all right.
Mr. Langevin? Thank you, Dr. Porter.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to both of our witnesses for your testimony today. And Dr. Porter, I'd like to start by asking you to expand on what you're talking about in terms of the DARPA project and using less data to get better outcomes, if you want to talk a little more about that.
Sure, that's just one of the many areas that DARPA has been focusing on. I think some of you are aware of their AI Next campaign, or which they've announced publicly. And they're trying to address all of these weaknesses or several of the weaknesses, I should say, that I outlined. And one of them has to do with this reality of the big data problem. Folks on the cutting edge are now talking about how we can't just be using traditional machine learning. What's the next step? How do we combine other elements to get after this? And if I can brag about something that DARPA has done recently, because I think it'll give you some hope when I say I think the United States has ways to stay ahead. They recently started something called AI exploration. And this is a way that they very rapidly get money out, particularly into academia and the labs and the small businesses, to say, all right, by the time I announce my concept I want you guys to go after, within 90 days I'm going to get you the money. Not from the time I tell you you're selected, but from the time I post it to the time you get the money. They've already done this once, and within 90 days they had 16 awards out, each about $1 million or so. And the problem they're tackling is, can we bring some physics into machine learning so that we don't need as much data and we don't have to worry so much about these fragile and brittle things that I was talking about. So I'm telling you this story because I think you've got a lot of innovation going on within the DoD enterprise to say, how do we get to speed as well as scale? And this is what Dana and I are going to continually try to work together on, is how do we move faster? Because AI is all about speed. It really is. This is one of those domains where things are just going very, very quickly.
Thank you, Dr. Porter. Mr. Deasy, as I mentioned in my opening statement, data is the fuel that powers AI and machine learning. So what efforts are you undertaking to promote policies and practices that ensure DoD owns data collected under its authorities?
Yeah. So it's interesting, when I joined the department and we kicked off the JAIC, sir, one of the earliest questions I got asked was, what are going to be some of the earliest stumbling blocks you're going to face in the successful stand-up of JAIC? And I said, I can almost predict now that as we roll out the first 2, 3, 4 applications, the thing that will be hitting us over and over again will be data. And what do I mean by that? It will be, where is the single source of the truth coming from? How do you ingest it? What are its formats? Do we have duplicative? And how do we bring it together? Part of the reason why you heard me comment in my opening remarks about the integration of cloud. Cloud provides us the physical capacity to take this enormous amount of data and bring it together. True, it will still continue to sit in different formats, but what we will do in development of Jake is we will start to define with different problem sets and different algorithms what is the expectation in terms of the data standards that need to be deployed. So if we're looking at audio versus we're looking at image data, or if we're looking at textual or good old-fashioned tables. One of the things that Jake will need to do is two things. Technically describe what it is we need to do to ingest the data and what are the tools. And then two is, what are the policies and standards that need to be put in place on the correct formats of data as people develop new systems going forward?
Yeah, but I need to, you didn't answer my question about what are we doing to ensure that DoD owns the data collected under its authorities. I need that, but I also need to ask you, how are you incorporating publicly available data sets into your efforts, and have you had challenges accessing data sets owned by other entities? So those two.
Yeah, too early from the standpoint of Jake, as Jake's just stood up, so we haven't had a program right now where we are actually accessing public data. DARPA may be in a position to describe what they've done in that standpoint. But indeed, there will be programs eventually where we'll need to incorporate that, and we'll have to be very clear on the ownership of that data. If the data is truly being created, whether it be from an intel community, a mission partner, very clear rules of the roads will have to be established early on into the ownership of that data. Part of our job in standing up Jake, and I need to stress this throughout today, is that this is going to be an iterative learning cycle. We're going to take something in, we're going to learn what are the issues. One of the issues is the one that you probably bring up here. Who owns the data? Where is the legal authorities for that data? And we're going to have to actually take these on a case-by-case basis, then develop ongoing policy that can be applied for more missions as we go forward.
Okay. I'm glad we're thinking about these things now, for sure. I know my time's expired. I have other questions. If we get to a second round, I'll ask those then. If not, I'll submit them for the record, but thank you, and I'll yield back.
Thanks. Dr. Abraham.
I refer to even gene editing here of late. We've seen that go a wire on the eastern part of the globe. So I worry about the scientific discipline that will be involved with our data. To follow up on Jim's question a little bit, Mr. Deasy, the algorithms that are constructed by, I'm assuming, commercial industry, they own that data. Am I correct there? The way the law stands as of now.
Yes, so in the case of some solutions that we built, for example, in Maven, where we've used partners, part in that case will be commercial available solutions and algorithms that they will own.
And you said Jake wants to incorporate people from industry to be
Absolutely.
part of the total family. Is that a correct statement?
It will be a combination of those solutions that will be developed by our own organization, Jake, and those that will be developed through partners. So there will be no single solution where we'll probably come from either all commercial internally, but we'll be using a combination of both.
When I just go back to a few years ago where the VA had a physician develop a drug that was used and who owned that particular patent, you know, it was a big mess. So I just implore, and I know I'm sure you're ahead of the curve here, but if we have rules of the roads in place before those algorithms are developed, and then we have to get into this debate, I think it's, you know, prudent to do that. Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abraham. Mr. Larson.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming today. So one of the criticisms or, I guess, concerns when we compare ourselves to our competitors especially China, is it can take a top-down approach, sort of drive everything through state-owned enterprises, through public, what they consider public financing, where we have to have more of a bottom-up approach because we have such a very active private sector innovative economy. And so how are you trying to balance that? How are you trying to drive the innovation so that it creates options for the DoD to pick from? Because we're probably not going to drive it to any one solution, but you have a set of solutions and then you can choose partners as you move forward. Who might be best to answer that?
Well, I'll talk about it from an operational
Yeah,
things
sure.
in production. We'll let Dr. Porter discuss it more from a research and science.
Yeah.
So the way that Jake is being established is going to be very much a hub and spoke model. There will be a physical entity that we're creating in the Washington, D.C. area, but we recognize that we're going to need talents that are going to exist, for example, outside the academic environment. So part of our spoke model is we'll be establishing locations next to academic environments. We're actually in the process of selecting those right now, where they will have certain skill sets. And so what we're actually doing is going through an inventory process of identifying what are the problems we believe are most need to solve for, and what institutions. Between that and the fact in our AI day that we ran recently, the reason we ran that day was we're now getting in white papers that are coming in from the commercial sector as well as the academic sector, starting to describe what are their solutions against the problem sets we're trying to solve. And we're right now in the case of actually building out an inventory of these solution sets.
Interesting. Dr. Porter?
So one of the things that when Dana and I talk about this, and this may be a helpful thing if you can visualize it, we think about near, mid, and long term. And in the near term, of course, that's where Jake resides. And in the midterm gets to kind of your question. This is where DIU, for example, says, all right, what's going on in the private sector? Because those problems that I articulated that we have to address, the private sector has to address as well. So if an algorithm isn't very robust, you know, my recommender system doesn't tell you that the movie that I'm recommending to you makes any sense to you, you're not going to use my system either, and that's going to cause revenue problems. So I got to solve that problem. So the DIU and places like that, they look and say, well, what are they coming up with in the near term or the midterm that we can fold back in and test? And so DIU has a very effective way of basically doing proof of principle and projects at a lower level and say, okay, Jake, we think we got this. We want you to scale it up and really test it and wring it out and tell us where we're missing things and continue to iterate. So that's kind of a unique capability. Now, if you go a little further out, to your point, some of these problems the commercial sector are not going to solve because they're hard or they're not relevant to their markets. That's why we need a DARPA. That's why we need our national labs. That's why we need our underpinning across that entire spectrum of our academic experts who can guide us in the near, mid, and far term to think about what can we solve now and where do we need to have long-term strategic investment. And again, the willingness as a nation to continue to invest in the hard problems, even as, you know, some of those are going to lead to missteps and we're going to have to try again, right? That's that high-risk, high-payoff realm. So we have to cover that entire spectrum. If we do that, we can optimize on benefiting from the private sector as well as pushing to solve the problems we care about most that are hard. I'm sorry I went over the time.
No, that's fine. I got a little less than a minute. So the Center for Strategic and International Studies just published a report late last month on AI and national security, and the argument they made was the need for robust supporting capabilities or an ecosystem around AI, especially within DoD. And I don't know if your folks have evaluated that, but it might be it's not an easy read for people like me, but it's a good read for folks like you to use it maybe as a marker standard to compare yourself against. There's other folks writing about this as well. But I would commend that to you. And they outline a variety of areas, you know, trust and security of AI, the people part of it, the digital capability and the policy, which you've you've already outlined some of those concerns, the things you're trying to focus on. I would just lay that out there if you're thinking about how to compare yourself to where maybe you ought to be versus where you are today. And I'll wait for a second round. Thanks.
Mr. Heiss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. China has identified as AI as a strategic technology for them, and they plan to develop an AI industry worth over $21 billion by 2020. As we all know here in this room, China also has a strong history of both government and industrial espionage, and this just creates a great deal of concern personally. So what are we doing to protect ourselves, specifically from China, but really from anyone, from hackers? What are we doing to make sure our AI program remains ours?
Okay, I'll start. So I'd say a couple things on that. Interesting enough, we're actually going to apply AI to help us address this problem. So I mentioned earlier we have two types of initiatives, national mission initiatives and component mission initiatives. We're actually doing some work right now to start to evaluate with U.S. Cyber Command how is it we can apply AI in pattern recognition and signatures. Where are you looking for anomalies that are going on in your network? And how can you use AI to quickly assess that there's been a change to what is a normal pattern? If you think about how hackers actually try to penetrate, they will go to the point of least resistance, and once they're in, they'll go laterally, and then what you're looking for is exfiltration. And so we believe actually AI will be a very good machine use case for looking at how we look at signatures and patterns of data across our network and actually use that to help ensure that we don't have exfiltration occurring from the folks like Chinese.
Dr. Porter, would you like to add anything to that?
Sure. I think you're highlighting an extremely important point. I think there are specific technical approaches that we're going to be working, and that example is a good one because we're not going to get it all right, and it's going to be iterative, and DARPA, in fact, is also looking at this from their perspective. But I would want to emphasize the broader point you're making. I think we have to be vigilant and aware of this problem. I actually spent time at InQtel, and I've spent time in the Intel community, and I know this committee was briefed, I think, back in June about the 1,000 Talents program that China has, and I know you guys were told at that time exactly your point. They have a goal of facilitating both legal and illicit transfer of U.S. technology, intellectual property, and know-how. And we have to be cognizant of that in the community. So across our research domain and spectrum, we are thinking about that. It isn't just about protecting against hacking, although that's certainly a big part of it. It's all of those ways that they have to try to capture that intellectual property, which I think is what you were alluding to.
Absolutely it is. And I know some of this probably would be best served in another environment than this, but I would like to dive deeper into this issue, if we can, in another setting. Going back to what Mr. Larson said, I want to just get a little more clarity. How do you plan to recruit talented data engineers and scientists? So, specifically in the near term, I guess.
Right. So right now we have approximately 30 people inside. It's a combination of civilians, which are DoD employees, as well as military. The philosophy is, over time, we're going to need to actually build out an internal capability that will include people inside the military. So what we've done recently is we've brought in 10 very highly talented, skilled individuals from the various services into Jake. We're going to team them with data scientists, been there, done it, people that we're recruiting. And the idea is to use this pairing system so people can leave Jake, go back into the services, and then use that to increase the flywheel. How we're recruiting people is a combination of commercial contacts, academia contacts, think tank contacts. We have quite a list of people that we're currently identifying. We expect at some point we may have to put something in place like this cyber accepted service, which is going to allow us to recruit in a way that has a lot of additional speed. It's going to have to handle compensation differently, and it's going to handle how we onboard them in a much better fashion than you would normally onboard into government.
Okay. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Mr. Deasy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask Dr. Porter or Mr. Deasy about the $2 billion that DARPA has announced as a multi-year investment for AI next. Can you explain to me exactly what the $2 billion is going to be used for? Is it just to sort of develop a kind of a basic groundwork on how we should move forward, or is it going to advance specific technologies?
So it's kind of both, because that's what DARPA does. Now, to be clear, the $2 billion is over 5 years, right? So it's roughly $400 million a year. And they have several thrust areas that target these problems that I was talking about. So one, I already told you about this exploration program, and this is that really rapid getting stuff out there and getting really great ideas funded. So we do exactly what you just said and provide that foundation for larger efforts. There's also a lot of focus on what I mentioned, adversarial AI. This is where it's been proven, and if you read the popular press, there are these examples that people are publishing almost daily now, where they can spoof AI systems pretty easily. One of the ones that's notable, because in the self-driving car community they really took note of this, is there is a team at Berkeley at the school out in California. They put tape on stop signs. And when we put the tape on the stop signs, the AI system thought the stop sign was a speed limit sign for 45 miles an hour. So you can imagine that's a little bit of a problem, right? So there are countless examples of this now. It's almost a game now where people are showing all the ways they can spoof these systems. So obviously, if we're going to trust this and we're going to apply it to things where there's high stakes, i.e. the DoD mission, we've got to do much better at understanding how we ensure that people can't spoof our systems. There's a lot of research to be done there, and that's one of the key thrust areas in the AI Next program.
As we try to gain a better understanding, is the $400 million, is that like a good starting number, or where does the number ideally need to be in order for us to sort of stay on track? And right now, I think that you had mentioned earlier that when it comes to China and other competitors, that we actually are ahead, but financially, like, where do we need to be to make sure that we stay ahead and that we can continue to work on things like making this AI more smarter to where tape can't throw it off?
You got it. I think it is a reasonable investment level, and one of the things DARPA likes to emphasize, which I fully agree with, is it's not just the amount of money you invest in, it's how you do it. So DARPA has a model, right, where they try things that a lot of people won't try because it's risky and it may not pay off. And if it doesn't work, no harm, no foul. We'll try something else because we're trying to pursue the really hard things. That whole model that DARPA has is pretty unique. And in fact, when you couple that with a robust funding effort, as the $2 billion over 5 years is, you can actually get significant jump aheads. And that's really what I'm trying to emphasize here. That's one of our unique secret sauce ingredients in the United States.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You're back.
Mr. Bacon.
Thank you both for being here. Grateful for your expertise and sharing it. It seems to me that until a few years back, or maybe even a decade ago, was DoD would drive a lot of the technology. Private sectors would then leverage that, and then we saw a period of time where there was probably a lot of even synergy. But in my visits recently to the private sector and some of the larger companies, it seems to me they're producing technology faster than DoD can install it, or with the requirements process, testing. By the time we do field it, it's already 2 or 3 years out of date, if not more. How are we positioning ourselves right in the AI to stay abreast and not fall behind?
So I'll start, and then because I think this is a joint answer. I think you highlighted the problem we are very much interested, the two of us, in trying to address. If we do nothing else, we're going to still have this problem, because even if DARPA gets us ahead of the game and the private sector takes off with those ideas and goes their own way and creates these great products, we've got to have a way to more rapidly transition that innovation back in, learn from it, and continue the cycle. And both Dana and I have talked multiple times about the speed challenge, and this is why we're really trying very hard to figure out how do we coordinate that cycle, so that spin cycle, if you will, so that we get multiple spins very quickly rather than 3, 4, 5 multiple year cycles just to insert something. It's not solved, but I think what you're seeing here is a real serious attempt by the DoD to say, let's line this up so that we can improve this. Would you not agree?
Yeah, as someone who spent the majority of my career in the private sector, I'm often asked when I arrive, what is it I've noticed most? And I say clock speed, how fast we can embrace, either decide to work with something, get rid of it, and move on. And one of the reasons we created the relationship we created was you need two things in AI to be successful. You need a maniacal focus on the here and now of operationalizing, getting things up and running, and that's that flywheel I talk about. But you also need an intense focus on where the future is going, where the science is going. And you need a place to take that science, in this case what DARPA develops, bring it in, rapidly decide whether or not it can work or not work. And if it doesn't work, move on, tell DARPA that's the case. Or if it is working and it just needs tweaking, then let's do that. This is why we think this model we put in place is actually going to help to address the very problem you raised, and how do we get the flywheel of innovation moving at a lot faster clock speed.
Are we confident DARPA is abreast of all the various private sector companies are doing? I mean, do they have their fingers on the pulse of a lot of different companies? Are we confident of that?
So we are confident, but that's why we also have DIU in our quiver. Okay. Because, as you know, DIU sits out in Silicon Valley, but also sits in Austin, Texas, sits in Boston, and is keeping its finger on the pulse. And again, where they're going to really see the innovation is a little bit nearer term, but that's that nice bridge between where DARPA may be looking a little further out. DIU is going to see where opportunities are in the next 12 to 24 months, which is much shorter than where DARPA typically looks. So we try to cover that landscape appropriately so that, you know, we're seeing everything we should be seeing.
Two follow-on questions. Do we need to make any revisions to our acquisition rules processes to help you out? One. Two, when I was recently visiting a company this past week, they would say they would come up with new technology, but because the DoD didn't have a requirement for it, they didn't want to really look at it. However, later on, they would say, yeah, basically the requirements were short-sighted because they didn't realize that what the technology carries, or, you know, what could be executed or applied. So my question, two of them, do we need to make any revisions to our acquisition system? And two, do your requirements keep up with some of the far-ranging technologies that you're seeing in AI? Thanks.
So I'll start with the first half of that on the acquisition. What I tell people often is, one of the things that we struggle with at the DoD and government is what I call a startup mentality. How you start AI is a very iterative process. And many times the acquisition cycles are asking you to define 30, 60, 90, 2, 3, 1 year, 2 years out, what the end state will look like. I'm just trying to get the end state identified for the next 90 days, 120 days, and then allow us to create this, what I'll call this iterative approach for how we're going to build out. We're going to try a solution. We may acquire a product. We'll say that product didn't quite meet the needs, and then we're going to need to go back out in a very rapid cycle. So yes, I do believe there will need changes, and I believe it's going to be how do we move to a more startup mentality when looking at technologies like AI.
We will now move to the second round of questions and get through as many as we can before they call votes. My second question has to do with a previous testimony before this committee. I believe it was Deputy Secretary Shanahan talked about the fact that there are hundreds of AI projects and programs within the DoD. Can you speak, Mr. Deasy, to how we plan on integrating those programs into the JAIC and how that process is going? And can you also highlight one of the best examples of an AI program that was started within the DoD that we can learn from?
Yeah. So clearly what the deputy was referring to is there is a lot of programs that are using data learning, machine learning, cognitive. You have to be quite thoughtful when describing what is the universe of AI. I would argue that some of those programs, when you really kind of dig under the covers, are more business analytics as they are as to true, what I'll call machine learning. With that said, there is no doubt that one of the biggest benefits that JAIC will bring is trying to reduce the replication and the duplication of tools, processes, and frankly, methodologies that are being used. A good example of this, and it actually brings DIU into it, is you think about the predictive maintenance. So this is an area where, you know, how do you look at helicopters, planes, ships, anything where there is a need to reduce the waste and the cycle time of readiness. This is an example where DIU went out and did some work, found some solutions in the marketplace. They're now bringing that to us. One of our first initiatives is predictive maintenance, and we're actually going to use the learnings from DUI and the commercial offerings as a way we're going to jumpstart the predictive maintenance.
Thank you. Mr. Langevin.
Thank you. So for Mr. Deasy, our military force projection capabilities are developed and tested almost entirely within the continental United States, but the nature of warfighting is largely expeditionary. That is, the great majority of warfighting is going to occur from the away from the wide infrastructure and domestic regulatory constraints of the U.S. and requiring flexible access to and maneuver within a different electromagnetic environment. What role do you see for AI in overcoming this challenge, and how would it potentially apply to other domains like space and cyber?
So interesting enough, I just came back from a Five Eyes meeting over in the UK in which we discussed with our mission partners what is the role that AI can play in a lot of spaces. You mentioned the one, the electromagnetic spectrum. I mean, the nature of electronic warfare is such that trying to degrade, spoof, and change the nature of spectrum is such that clearly AI can play a role in being able to quickly assess where spectrum has been compromised and how do you then change the nature of the use of that spectrum. Another example is if you think about mission partner networks and how we need to share data in a classified or confidential manner, we see that AI will be able to use, much to my earlier comment, patterns and changes of behavior as we're sharing data across our mission partner networks. And so we've had conversations recently with our partners on what is it that we should be doing more joined up in the matter of these AI initiatives.
Okay, thank you. That's encouraging. Also, getting back to data, what efforts are you taking to set standards and guidance for data integrity? And finally, what efforts are being taken to provide for a common lexicon for AI and machine learning?
So on the data front, one of the things that we're doing, for example, is we're working now with the CMO office. They have actually hired a chief data officer. And on the reform side, we're doing some early work because I've been quite a proponent to saying that we're going to have to solve for, do we really understand where the sources of our data come from, what I like to refer to as the single source of the truth. So we're partnering with the CMO and the Chief Data Management Officer to start to identify what are those going to be those problematic data sets where we're going to have to get clearer standards, especially in the back office area of reform. That's the area we're focusing on right now in the Chief Data Management Officer.
Dr. Porter, do you have anything to add on that?
Regarding the data integrity issue, I think...
Can I press your mic? Yeah.
I'm sorry about that. Regarding data integrity, there's also a research component to that as well. And again, it gets back to, as people recognize how important your data is to training your algorithms, they're going to try to mess with your data, right? And so there's both the how do you ensure you're thinking about AI not in an isolated way, but as was raised earlier, in the context of cybersecurity and other elements in your system that have to work together. And so one of the things I like to emphasize, which I think you were touching on, is when you ask questions about space and so forth, AI doesn't really mean anything until you think about it in the context of the larger system that you're using it in. So how does it apply to your mission usually means it has to be part of a larger system. How does it get integrated in a way that you don't open up vulnerabilities because you've forgotten that, wow, if my data is really easy to get into, someone's going to mess with it so that I'm training on the wrong thing, as an example. So there's research elements of this because we have to take a system-level approach, as we do with all technology, when we think about integrating it into operations.
So last question I had is, to what extent are the department's challenges based on development of AI technology, e.g. Data processing and neural network algorithms versus a lack of infrastructure such as big data repositories, compute power, and cloud capabilities? Microphone.
Thank you, sir. I'll start with that. So I mentioned earlier the cloud. If you kind of step back for a second and say, what what has happened that has allowed AI to suddenly be on the forefront of all conversations? And I would argue there's the data science behind this, and I would say we've entered an era now where there's unlimited compute power. AI needs massive amount of compute power, massive amount of storage, and of course you need the algorithms behind it. The reason why I've been so vocal and energized about wanting to get to an enterprise cloud capability is I want to provide the Department of Defense with a way to handle that unlimited compute capacity, unlimited storage, on demand, as needed, with high integrity. And this is why I have been such a strong advocate about pushing the need for an enterprise cloud solution, because the enterprise cloud is going to become the foundation for which all the data and all that compute power will reside on top of, and those algorithms will use. And understand that when I talk about cloud, I'm not talking about a centralized single repository. I'm talking about a world where we need to work in a decentralized world if you're out at the warfighter tactical edge, and we need to be able to work in what I'll call a compromised, degraded mode. So it's clouds that can handle the edge all the way that clouds can handle the central.
Thank you. You know, my time's expired, so yield back. Thanks.
Thank you very much to our witnesses. Votes have been called. For other members who we didn't get to your second round of questions, please submit your questions for the record. And thank you, Dr. Porter and Mr. Deasy, for the testimony today. We look forward to discussing this in the next Congress, and I look forward to working with Mr. Langevin on it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hearing is adjourned.